Alright guys, today we've got another 2005 Chevy Tahoe, and we've got an engine light on here. And as you can see, I've got my VCM scanner hooked into the car here. Let's see what we get. Knock sensor 2, low circuit bank 2. Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and start on this thing, replacing the knock sensor number 2, which is the one in the back. And so what we're going to do, we're going to start out by pulling this intake tube and the engine cover. Alright, I'm going to grab a 15mm and go ahead and pop this belt off right here. You don't have to really take it completely off, but just want to pop it off of this alternator right here. I'm going to go ahead and remove the alternator. Got a 10mm bolt on the back and a plug, two 15s in the front. Before you even continue, whenever you pull the alternator out, you got these little these ground clamps. Go ahead, get those tapped back a little bit. That way when you go to set your alternator back in, it'll just drop right in, and as you tighten your bolts up, it'll bite back down to get your good ground on your alternator. Go ahead and pull your fuel clamp. 3/8 disconnect tool. Got the fuel line out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this fuel line up in a paper towel and shove a Ziploc bag over it. Try to minimize fuel spill. Working on getting access to our wiring. As you can see, it's right on top of the manifold. Right down in deep well. Alright, next we got to disconnect the coil harnesses, which is just this main large plug. You don't have to worry about the individual coils. Unplug your injectors. Got your knock sensor harness back here, map sensor, throttle body. Alright, got the wiring harness all disconnected from the intake. Last time this thing was here, I had already bypassed the throttle body. If you're working on a Gen 3, you'll likely have a coolant hose running through your throttle body right here. I advise you just bypass it unless you live up north or something where it gets severely cold. Alright, now we got our 8mm. Gonna unbolt the intake. Got 5 bolts on each side. The ones in the back are generally a little more difficult to get to. Depending on what the vehicle is, this one actually is very simple. On the driver's side, you'll have 2 in the back, and then on the passenger side, you'll have 2 grouped together up in the front, and your other one's equally spaced with the runners. The lines we need to pop off. There's one on the passenger side. I'm going to pop that off with a valve cover. And the driver's side, it's usually easier to pull one off the intake. But, let's see. Well, this one, the one at the back, came off pretty easy. I'm going to hook this bungee cord up to the hood just to kind of simplify things a little bit. Got the wire all pulled back. Alternator's out of the way. Breather tube's out of the way. And intake's out of the way. Look at that. Now, I haven't been counting, but that couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. This is definitely not difficult. It's just a matter of knowing what order of things to do. Not too big of a deal. Sometimes this rear knock sensor will actually fail because of water running into the engine bay, and what that will do is it tends to collect or puddle up down in the tube where the knock sensor is at. With the old snap ring plugs, these plugs are down in these wells. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to take these snap ring plugs and you just squeeze the side of the plug. Then it comes right out. See that? It's kind of odd shaped, and when you squeeze it, it releases the clips. 22 it is. Alright. Let's start with the one that's bad. It did. Good deal. Oh yeah, she's definitely seen better days, for sure. Alright guys, we got a replacement sensor here, as you can see. And what we're going to do is we're going to take some anti-seize, or never seize, and spray on the threads there to make sure that it doesn't get stuck, or at least try to help keep it from getting stuck. And you see how that this case from the bottom is kind of smashed on there and sealed. Sometimes if you get one of these, it's pretty stuck. This part will spin inside, so you might have to take a sharp chisel and try to catch it in the edge of it and just tap it with a small hammer or something and kind of crack it loose. And another time I have actually taken a chisel and hit down in a few spots to kind of crimp the edge so it'll catch again. And I've had that work as well. But we're going to go ahead and throw this bad boy back in here. When you put this thing in here, you don't want it to be, it don't need to be tight. I mean, you don't want it coming loose, but it's not a bolt, it's a sensor. So you're just basically gonna run it down by hand, right? Till it bottoms out. And then we're just gonna give it just a little bit of a bite. I'm going to get this other knock sensor put in, the new harness. I'm gonna go ahead and clean up the surface of the heads a little bit, which actually this one's actually pretty clean. So I'm gonna go ahead and just wipe this stuff down real quick with some alcohol and get ready to put the intake back in. Alright, so I wiped out from around the cylinders, got the harness put in, got the knock sensors put in. You want to make sure that you get your knock sensor harness up where you can grab it, because once you slide your intake in, if you don't do that, it's going to be somewhere down behind it and you're going to have to get up there and fish it out, and you don't want to do that. So just kind of stick it up here somewhere so that you can keep up with it, and just makes things a little bit easier. So let me grab the intake and we'll get her put in. Slide this right back in. And make sure your wiring harness is kind of up where it needs to be. And once you get this thing in place, it just kind of sits right down. You kind of feel it when it's in the right spot. But this particular vehicle has hydro boost in it, so it doesn't have a vacuum line going to the intake like most of these will. So be kind of mindful when you're pulling the intake out. You gotta release the vacuum line from the back of the manifold. You can push the red ring in the back and the line will slide out, or if it happens to be easier for you, you can just pull the check valve off of the master cylinder, the vacuum booster, you know, and just take the whole line with the intake. Sometimes that's easier because every once in a while they don't really want to come out. So I'm going to go ahead and start screwing this thing in. I'm going to start with the middle. Just kind of make sure everything's sitting flat. And it's not all the way tightened down, it's just a little bit snug. Once I get the two middle ones, I'm going to go to the corner. So, even though it's one of the first things we actually unhooked, I actually prefer to go ahead and hook the fuel line up first, just because it smells a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and slide that fuel line back on, and don't forget your locking clip. Alright, there's my knock sensor harness. We don't want to forget that. Go ahead and plug the fuel injectors back up. Everything pretty much lays right out where it goes, so you don't usually have to worry too much about getting something mixed up. Put the safety clip back in. Fuel injector number 3. And give these guys a tug when you plug them on. Make sure that they're clipped on solid. You don't want a fuel injector to stop firing on you. So that's got most everything on this side. I'm gonna go ahead and put the harness back in place. You can see everything just lays right back down. There's the map sensor back there. Alright. Go ahead and hook up the breather on the passenger side. Now I'm hitting to grab the passenger side, the driver's side vent line. There it is. Let's get everything down this side with the alternator and the evap solenoid. So we're going to slide this evap solenoid back in here, and it's got an O-ring, so you want to check, make sure that the O-ring looks good. And we're just going to sit that guy right back down in there. Make sure it's seated properly. It's got a little slot to show you where it goes. Alright, so it's got our evap, our vacuum lines, our fuel lines hooked back up. I'm going to go ahead and get the fuel injectors and the cool line on the passenger side. And don't forget to put your wiring back in the clips, because we want people to know we did a good job. If you don't put stuff back in the clips, it makes you look like you either don't know what you're doing or don't care. So don't be that guy. Just take a few extra seconds. Go ahead and put everything back exactly the way you found it. Or if you found it wrong, put it in the correct way. It's just good practice to do that. Alright, so I'm going to grab the alternator and we're going to put it back on. You want to sand these guys down right here on the front where the ground clamps push into it. Just kind of clean that stuff up a little bit anytime you take your alternator off. And sometimes if you're having trouble with your charging system, even though it's somewhat unlikely, it's not a bad idea to pull your alternator off, sand all this stuff down, make sure that the alternator's got a good ground, because this is it. This is the ground for the alternator. There's not a ground wire. Now we're going to slide this guy in here. You see how it just drops right in because we tapped our ground clamps back. Slide your bolts in. Start them up. And you see how it just pushed that ground clamp into the alternator? That's what that popping noise is. So now that kind of bites into it. It's got like a sharp edge in it, and it kind of bites into the alternator to make sure it stays grounded. Don't forget the alternator plug, evap plug right there. And then we've got our alternator power wire here, which I'll taped up because I didn't really feel the need to unhook the battery for this. Generally on most vehicles, if there's not any kind of immediate danger, like pulling the starter for example, where you can't really control contact points and stuff, you're going to want to unhook the ground terminal on the battery no matter what. But something like this, you know, I could just wrap a little tape around this alternator wire and tuck it back out of the way, and that was really the only thing I had to be concerned about. And the reason for that is sometimes when you reset the car, you know, I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of vehicles. I'm not just talking about this one, but sometimes you might have problems with security. You might have to reprogram key fobs sometimes. You might have to reprogram preferences like memory seats and things like that. You might have to put a code in the radio. There's a ton of things that can be problematic when you disconnect the battery. So you definitely want to avoid that if you can. I'm not saying that you should go out of your way to try to make it safe, a situation that it shouldn't be. Like I said, if you're under the truck changing the starter or something, you cannot keep the starter wire from touching the exhaust or the side of the engine or anything. So you absolutely have to disconnect the battery. If you're going to unhook the computer, definitely need to unhook the battery. You know, so there's just certain things that it makes sense to unplug the battery. On these trucks in particular, the main issue you run into is that it will cause the HVAC system to not be, I guess for lack of a better term, homed. It's got a bunch of servo motors that control the blend doors, and what will happen is when you disconnect the battery, it will lose the position of those servos. So when you hook the battery back up and turn the key on, the PCM, I mean the body control module, is going to calibrate those. So it's going to run them all the way to one side, it's going to run them all the way to the other, it's going to record the positions of what's closed and what's open on all the blend doors, and then it'll know what it's doing. The problem when it does that is it kind of over torques the servos a little bit, because it's going to run it past, not really past, but it's going to be trying to just run it until it stops. So when it does that, it puts a lot of strain on the gear. So if it's an older vehicle, like this is a 2005, when you hook the battery back up, reset the AC system, it could very likely break the gear inside the HVAC module or blend door actuator, and so then you're pretty much on the hook to replace it, because it was working when it was brought in and it's not working when you get done. So you guys want to try to look out for that kind of stuff. We're going to go ahead and slide the belt back on, and all I did was just basically drop it off the alternator. So I'm going to get back on the tensioner, make sure everything's straight. Alright. Slide that back on. Get this back on. Orient it where it goes. Don't forget to clip the radiator back in, the radiator hose. Alright. So we're going to put this guy back in, which is going to be the 2 bolts. Got a nut for the wiring harness bracket. Going to grab our 10mm. Run these guys down. Right. So now at this point, you just kind of want to look over everything one more time. You know, make sure you got all your plugs in. Make sure your map sensor's plugged in. Throttle body. Make sure your throttle body's, you know, very well plugged in. You got your harness for your knock sensors, which is what we pulled this off for. All your coils. Your main coil harness, your fuel injectors. You know, you just want to look over everything, make sure everything looks good, and that's pretty much it. We're gonna go ahead and slide this intake cover on here, and that's an 8mm. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the 8mm socket ready. Slide those ears back in that bracket, and it should pretty well line up, and it feels like it is. So I'm gonna go ahead, and we are 100% done. Well, 99% done. But what I like to do after I have the intake manifold off, I'm gonna hook my computer up to it while it's running and make sure that the short-term fuel trims aren't jumping around or anything. It's just kind of like a way to, it's just kind of a way to make sure that you don't have an intake manifold leak. So, of course, if you're doing this at home and you don't have a live data logger or a data scanner, you know, you can pretty much just drive it, and if you end up getting a lean code, you know, then you know you might have an intake manifold leak, or you might have forgotten to hook up one of your breather pipes, or you might have a leak in one of these guys. So, but I'm going to hook the scanner up, run some live data right quick. Alright, I'm getting ready to do the scan. So I'm going to prime the fuel pump a couple times since we had the line disconnected. Alright. I actually cleared the engine light before I started working on it. Of course, it's not really accurate until you let it warm up. But from what I'm seeing, we're looking pretty good right now. Short-term fuel trims, you know, bouncing under 5% for sure. Alright guys, she's warmed up enough for me to see what I need to see. It's up to 145 degrees. And you can see here, even though it has it's not been running long, and when you reset the codes, it resets the long-term and the short-term fuel trim. So this is all fresh, and it's only been running for maybe 10 minutes tops. So this is going to dial in a lot more. But what I'm actually looking for on the short-term fuel trim is pretty consistent numbers between bank 1 and bank 2. And just so you know, if you had an intake leak on one of the runners or something like that, your bank 2, for example, might be reading like this, and then your bank 1 might be reading like 18% or 24% or whatever. But if you've got one that's significantly higher than the other one, then you've most likely got an intake manifold leak, especially if you've done some work like this. And you know, there's a high probability that that's the cause. That's what I'm looking for here. Now, I have seen this before with bad fuel injectors. I never mentioned this before, but the other Tahoe I was working on, the Joe Gibbs Tahoe, number 2 fuel injector had actually gotten clogged. And when I ran a scan on it, because it felt like it was misfiring, and it wasn't completely clogged, but it was clogged enough to really cause some damage. And so when I hooked the scanner up, bank 1's reading, you know, like this, and bank 2's reading like 26% or something, because you've got one oxygen sensor for each bank. So there's an oxygen sensor on the driver's side, there's an oxygen sensor on the passenger side, bank 1, bank 2. And when one fuel injector is not working, it starts reading lean, and so it tries to compensate with more fuel because it's programmed to do that, but it's only doing it with the 3 fuel injectors that are working. So you've got one that's in lean condition, and you've got 3 that are running really rich. But that's a good way to tell by looking at your fuel trims, you know, how your engine's looking. And you can see now that it started warming up some more, that the long-term fuel trim has actually settled down to right around, actually under 1% right now. So these numbers actually look fantastic. This is exactly what we're looking for. So I know for a fact that this thing is fixed. The knock sensor shows that it's reading properly, and I'm gonna go ahead just for fun. I'm gonna check for codes again. You can see no DTCs detected, and just to make sure, because some codes are set to come on the second time they're triggered, you always want to start it back up the second time. And we're gonna come back in here, and we're gonna We're going to let it run for a second until we see the short-term fuel trims kick in. It has to run for a few seconds before it goes into closed loop. That's basically what that is. Once it goes into closed loop, you'll see the short-term fuel trim start moving around. So we'll wait for that. There it goes. Okay, now we're going to read the codes again. Now that's 2 full cycles, and we don't have any engine codes detected. That coupled with our fuel trims, I'm very confident that this is fixed. So if you run a shop, this is a great way to verify that you have fixed something without having to drive the car for 15 or 20 or 30 miles or something, you know, to make sure the engine light don't come back on, or to have your customer call you back and tell you that the problem came back. We don't want that. So when you do it this way, you know for a fact that it's been fixed. You don't have to worry about it. Anyway, that's pretty much all I'm doing here. Appreciate you guys watching, and I'd appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. If you're new here, definitely appreciate subscribers, and we'll catch you on the next one.